Hello, my name's Kate Atkin, and I'm delighted to be talking to Estelle Levin Nally on the subject of self-confidence. We met at the Impact Women's Network and discovered that we both share a passion on the subject of confidence, and Estelle has very kindly agreed to be interviewed by me to talk about the subject of confidence, how you can grow it, how you deal with self-doubt, and how you can bounce back from failure. So I'm looking forward to sharing with you the thoughts, the ideas and the tips that she comes up with. Thank you very much, Estelle, for coming and joining me this morning for a discussion about confidence. Could you just tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do and what brings you to this discussion and your passion about confidence? If you
Sure. I'm the director of a small social venture called Levin Sources, which I founded myself, which is dedicated to moving more minerals through systems where basically sustainability is the norm. And I also am a mother and a wife and a daughter and a sister and a friend, and so I wear all of these hats, and a citizen, which I take very seriously. And I've come to this conversation about confidence because people have always commented on my confidence, but of course there are times where I have crises of confidence, and it's something I think about. And as a business owner and therefore a mentor and manager of other people who are going through their career, it comes up. And as a parent to my son and my daughter, it comes up. So it's obviously personally very interesting for me.
Thank you. Yes. And it's interesting about what is confidence then? If you were to define it for yourself, what do you see confidence as being?
I think it's about self-belief. It's about when you're facing something that's challenging or could be scary, knowing well your own limitations, strengths and weaknesses, so that you have the confidence to go in and face it well. I think it's about being able to embrace failure and know that, and have the courage to try, and even if you fail, know that you'll find positives that come out of it. Which doesn't mean going in and doing stupid things, because that's overconfidence. I think it's about measured, being measured and balanced in realizing this is hard, but it's worth trying, and even if I get it wrong or I make a fool of myself, there's honor or there's positives that can come out of it.
Yeah. And so do you see confidence as being something that you're born with, or do you think you can develop it? And can you develop it at a later age if you think you weren't born with it and don't have it?
I mean, having a little girl who is extraordinarily confident in some ways, and yet in her first social situations is always quite shy, I do think there's a degree to which you're born with confidence, because maybe it's to do with extroversion and introversion and being comfortable in various social settings. So there is a degree to which you might be born with a disposition towards confidence or to being less confident. But I definitely think the major factor in confidence is your experiences and how you're raised, and how you also coach yourself in challenging situations to come through them.
Yeah, and I think that idea of having a disposition towards, it's interesting about being confident, or at least appearing confident, because when you mention introversion, extroversion, I see people who are extroverted are perceived as confident.
That's true.
And people who are introverted or prefer to think before they speak are perceived as lacking in confidence, but the reality on the underneath can be absolutely the other way around.
Absolutely right.
So I think sometimes it's a construct that we put on others as to whether or not they have it.
Yes, I think that's well observed and touché, because when I think about other people I know who perhaps have done Myers-Briggs and have been identified as introvert, certainly when I socialise with them, or I do work with them, or even live with them, they can perceive a confidence which can sometimes come across even as haughtiness or arrogance because of their silence or perhaps withdrawal or lack of willingness to engage. And yet some of the most extrovert people I know have indeed confessed to me how deeply they lack confidence, and they perform this as a way of also building their confidence, and perhaps fooling the crowd.
Yeah. So thinking about building confidence, how would you suggest we go about developing confidence, whether it's in ourselves as adults or even in children, and would there be a difference between the two?
I think about a few arenas in which have helped me develop confidence, and maybe this is the time to raise them. One of my first thoughts is, as a child, if we went shopping and I bought something that or my mother bought me something that we had to take back, my mother would make me take it back. She'd make me go to the counter and say, "Thank you very much, I've decided I no longer want this." and I'd know that it was my right to do that. But as a child speaking to an adult, that was always challenging, but I had to do it because it was my decision not to have it. The same if there was a problem with the bank. My father would say, it was my bank account as a teenager, well, you phone up and you fix it. And if I couldn't, then he might step in and help me out. Yeah. But he'd always let me try first. And so I was allowed to fail safely with how my parents parented me. I also went to an all-girls school called the Ladies' College in Guernsey, which I will speak of with great affection. And I have remarkable and wonderful and beautiful friends still who are from there. And my husband always jokes about how we're all alpha. And my hen party was instructive because we had 12 alpha females on a narrowboat with one tiller. It ended up in loads of arguments, which wasn't funny at the time, but in hindsight is. But actually I think my schooling and this kind of notion of back in the 1980s and 90s, an all-girls school with teachers and headmistresses, male and female teachers, who coached us to have self-belief and who coached us to not allow gender to be a barrier, and to go and claim our futures and explore what we loved and really excel and push harder at what where we were good. I think that really worked for me in terms of that schooling. I don't think it worked for everybody, but it definitely worked for me. So schooling was important. And then I think the other thing that really helped me with my confidence was being in the performing arts and learning languages. When you're learning languages, you've got to be willing to be a fool. You have to be willing to try and stumble through a badly constructed sentence with the wrong words and trust that the other person is going to be kind about it.
It's actually not being laughed at, isn't it?
Yes, and if you are saying, well, come on, give me a break. Yeah. And it's the same with performing arts. From a very young age, I was passionate about music, drama, and my parents very kindly shuttled me all around Guernsey and took me to lessons, and I wanted to go into competitions, and I always found them really hard. I found it particularly hard for piano, because piano for me was like a form of self-expression and meditation. It was a form of catharsis. I used my piano to cope with my emotions, and actually getting up on stage and playing piano was a little bit like bearing myself open to the world, and that was really challenging, and I still struggle to actually perform piano. But when it came to singing, you couldn't hold me back. It's like you can't get me off the stage when it comes to singing. I just love it. And I know I'm not the world's best singer, but the years of having to sing in choirs, in different styles, in bands, as an independent soloist, on radio, on television, which I did in Ecuador, not here. That was quite fun, in a rock band. All of that taught me how to have stage presence. And I pull that into my work, my personal life. It helps me pull myself together when I'm afraid. And it helps me say, it's okay, I have to go through this. I have to have courage to try. And if I screw it up, I screw it up, and I'll just confess it and say thank you for tolerating me. And if people aren't kind, then there's something wrong with them.
Yeah. And there's something also about the physiology I'm noticing in that when you're speaking and talking about the singing, you're broadening your shoulders slightly. And I think also that physiology makes a difference, doesn't it? Into being able to own your presence and your state and who you are. And people also then see you as being confident, perhaps treat you in that way.
Yes, I think that's right. I had to give a talk on Friday at the OECD in Paris. I probably shouldn't say this when everybody sees me, and I was thinking it really should be this team member or that team member that does it. That's not me, because it was on Mercury, and I'm not a mining engineer, I'm not an environmental scientist, and I'm not the person in a mineral sector development team that really focuses on this. I work at the strategic level across all these things, but it was me that was speaking it, and I thought, how am I going to carry this off? And I just was fortunate that my team could funnel me some key bits of information, and I just had the vision, and I got up there and I did it. And I was in a safe space with colleagues I've known for years and others that I don't, but it's a very high standing public forum, and you just have to go, I'm prepared, I know what I'm saying, I'll deliver it. And it worked. It worked.
So I'm going to pick up on that point, because I'm very much, as you know, involved in looking at the imposter phenomenon as well, where people feel as if they're a fraud. And the piece that you mentioned there is I was fortunate to have a team that could feed and funnel me the key information. I'm not sure it's fortunate in the fact that you've built the team and the people around you. So I think we put so much down to luck, where actually we probably shouldn't.
Yes.
We probably should put it down to the things that we have built, the people that we've worked with, developed, got to know. And yes, you were given the information to work on it, but I'm not sure fortune or luck necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough.
Its part. And I think it's interesting how, when I speak about the imposter phenomenon, some people going, oh well, I just happen to have the right team and the right information to hand to be able to do it. I just happen to be lucky to be the one that got up to do that. And I think sometimes there's a bit more than luck involved.
Perhaps so, yeah.
So we've talked a bit about where you've learnt how to be confident. What do you think, and the schooling and I think from what you were saying, the singing's had the biggest impact on your confidence, if I pick up on the threads of that you've been speaking about. So one of the things that we haven't touched on yet in any depth is failure, and thinking about failing at something and coping with failure. You have said that you need to, if you fail, other people need to be kind and allow you to do it, and if not, then there's something wrong with them. That's right, but actually it's also interesting from a mindset of somebody who's failed in my life at certain things, and my biggest was failing the 11 plus, but it's that aspect of, oh my goodness, therefore I internalize the impact of the failure, whereas you externalized it then as that there's something wrong with them. Could you just say how we could learn to do that?
Sure, and I should qualify that, because if you're in a professional setting and you screw it up, you know, there are issues with that. You have to go in prepared and try your best. And there are some settings where failure is serious and you've got to be accountable for that. So I'm not saying just go and be flippant. I'm saying be prepared. And if you fail, own up to it and remedy it. Yeah. Right. So I don't want to just say, oh, it's all right, it's all about them. But I do think there is something to be said about not worrying too much about what other people think. And you've obviously got to be considerate, you've got to be mindful. I think if you're naturally compassionate and a natural influencer and communicator, you are always thinking about your relationship to the people in the room or to the audience and how they're reacting to you, and have you got a warm audience or a cold audience. So there's something about investing in building that warmth, in building that trusted space, and you do go into situations where you are going to confront an awful situation. I had an experience in 2008 in Madagascar where I was called in to evaluate the sustainability performance of an artisanal mining community in order to support a downstream buyer in their decision as to whether or not and how they could buy gold from this place and market it as ethical. And there was a lawyer, a British lawyer who'd lived there for many years, a man, incredibly alpha, who I had dinner with, and used the dinner as an opportunity to absolutely attack me and seek to undermine every ounce of credibility I had and legitimacy I had to come and do this evaluation. And I felt very, very upset about it and very cross about it. There was a degree of misogyny in it, and there was a degree of gerontocracy in it as well, because I was young. But I was capable. I had a framework that I had developed based on several years of research and work. I was qualified, and whilst I wasn't qualified as a professional auditor, I had adequate research and social science skills to be an evaluator on behalf of this company. And that experience sticks with me because it was horrendous. It was horrendous. It was deeply upsetting, and it shook my confidence. But it was an example where this guy was always going to have an issue with me. He was always going to, because of his prejudices and his position, and because of the stake he had in what was going on. And so I had to understand those interests and be able to say, there's a degree to which this is about me, but I'm entitled, I'm credible, I'm legitimate, it's okay. And just learn from that experience.
I think when I did some interviews for my MSc and research with entrepreneurs about confidence and the imposter, and their view of failure was, it came out really strongly as things that didn't work, and it was learn from it and move on.
That's right.
It's not wallow in it. And I think sometimes we fear failing too much. I think we're brought up, perhaps certainly from an academic perspective, at looking at, if you don't do these things, then have you failed? And it can be, for some, quite formative on their view of failure.
That's right.
As to not achieving in that sphere, to then say, oh, dare I do something in the workplace? And people hold back from having the courage to even try. And I think what you've said there is, there's something about viewing the failure, taking some time to regroup yourself, but also taking time to decide what matters to you, and then having the courage to retry, to do it again, to get back up. And there's a quote, I can't remember who it's by, but it's, I'm a success because I tried.
Yes. I'm
not a failure.
Exactly. Absolutely. I think oh gosh, I think both Samuel Beckett and the gentleman that discovered electricity, who, for the shame of me, I can't remember, but I don't care because I can't remember everything. But they both have a couple of very good quotes on failure. My mum, who's amazing, and an amazingly confident woman, brought up and worked in Glasgow, and then had to move in very wealthy circles later in life, and so can chameleon into different settings. She has all of these wonderful idioms that she throws at me when things like this happen. Like, it's not you, it's them, and when one door closes, another opens, and every cloud has a silver lining. And these you can say flippantly, but there's so much truth in it. If you fail at something and that path closes to you, you might have been so focused on that you didn't see the other opportunities that were creeping up behind you, and you reorient and you go, actually, that is better. And what's right for you won't go by you, things like this. And I really believe in those things, and they come into my head as soon as I fail, or my child fails, or my husband fails, or my colleagues fail, or we fail as a team. I go, well, that's all right. It just creates opportunities to do these other things that we wouldn't other be able to do. And then you go and you embrace that, and you put it behind you, and you don't dwell on it. You learn from it, you deconstruct it, you use it, you take time to contemplate, you take time to remedy if you made a mess around it. You must always do that, for dignity's sake and because it's the right thing. But you brush yourself off and you carry on. There you see, I'm full of idioms. But
it's so true. It is. Yes.
Another thing that I failed at that I want to share is that I was always told I was one of the cleverest in the class, and then I did my GCSEs and I got 9 A's and a B, and then I still thought of myself as clever, and I went to do my A-levels and I got 2 A's and a B. And then I went to university and I got into 8 different places to do psychology, and then I went, don't I want to go away for a year? And then I changed my mind as usual, and in August I called up Edinburgh and I said, will you have me? And they said yes. So I went into Edinburgh, began in biology, and then halfway through moved into geography, which is my true passion, and worked very, very hard in actually 2.5 years to do essentially a 4-year geography degree. And I missed a first by about 2 percentage points, and I got a 2-1. And I just felt this constant nearly getting there is just who I am. And I have kind of learned to live with the fact that I will always strive to be the best I can be, but I'll probably never be perfect. And that's okay, because there's still a lot of good that gets done. And I think when you can let go of that pursuit of perfection, or that pursuit of being the best, and that kind of competition that comes with that, or that sense of being judged, you kind of unleash yourself and you grow more and you actually are better. Yeah.
And that idea of, we'll probably never be perfect. None of us are perfect, but that striving for perfection can be crippling, can't it?
It can, yes.
And I know from the research on the imposter phenomenon, it's the desire to be perfect and not putting anything out there until it is perfect that actually prevents people from trying in the first place. And that's really, it's sad. It's sad. But it's also this other point I wanted to pick up on, because another quote was going through my mind, and it's C.S. Lewis, and it links to something that you were saying earlier about it's thinking not worrying about what other people think of you so much. And there is a level from the imposter phenomenon about narcissism, and it's so interesting that we don't like to feel narcissistic, but we do worry sometimes about what other people think of us if we have this imposter feeling of, am I good enough, should I be? It becomes all about me, whereas actually it isn't.
It's a relationship, isn't it?
And C.S. Lewis has a lovely saying which is about humility, because some people hold on to the imposter, hold on to their I won't be overly confident, I mustn't become arrogant, because, and the quote itself is, it's true humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less.
Oh, that's a wonderful quote. That's a wonderful quote, and it's very true. And I think humility is always something that, because I'm going to say my mother brought me up to be so confident, but because I do have a lot of confidence, there are times that I'm sure people think, oh, she's so egotistical, or that she can be narcissistic. I expect that there will be a negative perception by some about how I carry myself and how I go into the world. And sometimes that might be jealousy, sometimes it might be true and fair.
Do you think it could be gendered?
It could it's definitely gendered as well. Absolutely, and I've experienced that. But I actually think that humility is something that I've always come back to and I seek to achieve. And I think when we succeed in things, this is why I seek to recognise and celebrate the role everybody played in it, and not just claim that. That's why I changed my business's name, because my business was Estelle Levin Limited, and the biggest thing for me about that was it annihilated and obliterated the very important and leadership roles that everybody else in my company have and do. And it's also why within the business I try very hard to make sure that when I get an invitation to speak, I'll push somebody else in front of them and say, actually, it's Fabiana or it's Adam that you should have, because they're the real experts in this. And it's that's partly about humility, but it's also about lifting other people up. And we do better when we empower others to do better too, share the opportunities. The problem is if that gets taken advantage of, and that's happened to me, and that's always very upsetting. But we all want to go on and succeed, don't we? And people do it in different ways.
Yeah, and it's encouraging others to succeed. It's that piece, again, coming back to, it's not all about me, it's not all about you. It's getting that balance right. And I think we were talking prior to starting the filming, we were talking about the aspect of getting courage and consideration in balance, weren't we? Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Well, we were talking about arrogance, and I was trying to unpack with you the difference between arrogance and confidence. And I was speaking to one of my mentors yesterday, Karen Anderson, who's from the Cambridge Social Ventures programme. And I was telling her I was coming to see you, and I was saying, and this is all the ways that I'm confident. We were joking about it, and I said, gosh, I'm sure I'm coming across as really arrogant. And she said, Estelle, I don't think you could ever be seen as arrogant. And I can't fully understand why that is. And I think it's because I am always thinking about other people and about sharing platform and sharing achievements. And also I'm in the business of helping others do better. That's what my business does as a social venture. So maybe that's why arrogance is not the same as confidence in my setting and in my circles. But we were speaking about the gendering of this, and how perhaps there's a gendering between arrogance can sometimes be more of a masculine trait and confidence more of a feminine trait. I don't know if that's fair.
I don't think it's fair. Yeah. I think women who portray confidence, as we said earlier, perhaps can be perceived as being arrogant just because we gender stereotype what we expect from a woman. But also I think we gender stereotype what we expect from a boy and a girl as well. And I think sometimes girls are brought up where it's okay to be shyer, whereas boys are encouraged not to be. So sometimes this piece about the argument of confidence, are you born with it or do you grow it? I think even in the very, very early stages, unconsciously as parents, maybe people have this impact on their children where they expect something, and therefore that is what comes to pass.
I think one of the things that really affected my confidence as a child is to do with gender, and it's to do with the objectification of women based on their physicality. So sexualization of women. And as a child, I'll say it now, as a child I was quite a pretty child. As a teenager I was a bit gawky, and I had tremendous self-confidence issues about how I looked as a teenager, and it wasn't helped because I had this long-standing passion for a boy that just wasn't interested in me. And I'd cry myself to sleep at night, why doesn't he love me? And it was probably because I was so desperate about him that I was completely unattractive. But anyway, that certainly didn't help. But it took a lot of exploration and making mistakes in sexual and romantic relationships to kind of, and actually embracing feminism to have me understand the way that I was allowing myself to be objectified, and I was objectifying myself and judging myself through those lenses. And when I began to shed that and not use that as a way of valuing myself, I think I actually became more beautiful too, because it stopped mattering and I stopped being self-conscious about it. And I just became a bit more relaxed about not wearing makeup. I stopped wearing clothes that were there to assert my physicality as a way of saying I'm cool or I'm beautiful. I started to think about fashion differently. I started to think about self-presentation differently. I started to work professionally differently because I began to shed this issue with being objectified. And so I suppose I decolonized myself of patriarchy. Not completely, I still battle with that. But I think that was so much to do with building my confidence. And it's something that I try and do with my children, although I think they're gorgeous and I want to tell them all the time how beautiful they are, and I do. I try very hard not to speak about physicality as a ticket into being valued, if you see what I mean. It's such an important piece, and especially for girls and women. My daughter is obsessed with fashion and style and pulling these style moves, and she's 5, and I'm like, can we stop this? This is not healthy. But then on the other hand, I turn it into, well, let's talk about the history of fashion. Why don't you dress mummy? And we turn it into something creative and positive and make it less to do with looks and exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet there is something, again, as adults, when you get into the business world, you sort of, there's a what you're expected to portray and how you can feel. And I mentioned earlier, I was before we started the filming, that I was reading a journal article on the cognitive consequences of formal clothing, and the fact that sometimes when you do put on that jacket, you do feel prepared to give your presentation, to do something. And so sometimes there is a persona that we put on based on, yes, what we're wearing, based on how we're holding ourselves, that doesn't match with the inside. So I guess in some ways my final question at this point is to say, is it all about confidence? Is that the be all and end all?
Of course it really helps, but you step up and do things that are hard. I don't think it's all about confidence. What do you mean by all? What is it? Is it happiness?
Exactly.
Is it self-fulfillment?
What you want to achieve, do you need to have confidence to...
Well, you definitely need to have courage.
Yeah, I'm with you on
that. If you
one.
don't have confidence, have courage, try. And you might find that confidence is an outcome because you've proven to yourself you could do it. And I think if you don't have confidence and you have courage and you fail, try and be objective about it. And don't beat yourself up about what went wrong. Learn from it and say, well, that's me, I've learned it, that's good, I'm going to not do that again. Or I will try again, but I'll do it differently this way. Keep going. You know, you think about people who are unemployed, and there are some people that'll try a few times and then they just get tired. And then there are some tremendous people, remarkable people, who just keep going and send off hundreds of CVs, and eventually they get that break, that opportunity. Good on them. I mean, that shows tenacity and will. So I don't think it's just about courage. Confidence. I think one way to build confidence, if you don't mind me popping this in at the end, I was talking to quite a senior figure in the jewellery world last week, who's had a very distinguished career in diamonds and in jewellery. But he was talking about how what he does is he sets himself every month a challenge to do something new. So even a man in his 50s who's achieved so much is seeking to grow, and he's finding growth in challenging himself to do things that are new or frightening, or whatever it might be. It might just be about trying a new food that you've never tried. It might be going paragliding or swimming with sharks, which would be the big thing for me to have courage to do. And it, you know, so even if you can only do something really, really small that's new, I think if people lack confidence, that's where you start, and you give yourself the space to fail.
And totally. And it start with the baby steps.
Totally.
It's do something new that's, yes, a bit scary, but it's not jump straight into the shark tank.
Exactly.
It's about taking some steps towards it,
Yeah.
first and foremost, rather than deciding you're going to fall off that cliff edge.
That's
and
right.
potentially collapse in a heap at the bottom. Yeah. Estelle, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you
Likewise.
so much. Before we do finish the film,
Yeah.
is there anything else though that you would like to say on this subject of confidence?
I wish there was, but I think you've covered it very well. Thank you very
Pleasure.
much.
Thank
Sorry.
you.